The World Cyber Games, WCG, was one of the major tournaments in the Quake 3 calendar, with CPL having died off in terms of Quake 3, switching to Counter-Strike, and QuakeCon being the only other major tournament. It was one that if you wanted to be the best player, you had to secure for your legacy. And for the 2002 edition, 04 came in looking to win back the top spot in the world, having flunked out at 7th to 8th place in the previous QuakeCon tournament. Worse still, his rival, the Russian Lexa, had won QuakeCon, but then himself not gone on to qualify for World Cyber Games, meaning this was an opportunity for 04 to take back the top spot. What's more, 04 was the reigning WCG champion from the previous year, where he'd beaten Lexa in the final. So coming into the tournament, with it being a tournament with a massive amount of players qualified because it was the Olympics of gaming, representing all different nations, many of the groups were pretty easy groups. They seeded them reasonably well. You didn't tend to get like 3 or 4 top players in one group. And 04's group looked pretty doable. He had Kula from Russia, now known as obviously one of the all-time great players, but at the time, 16 years old, had never been to an international tournament before. All people knew about him was a few Russian tournaments, including this Russian qualifier for this tournament, where he'd finished ahead of Lexa. You had Sturmy from Italy, again, now a famous player, now an all-time great Quake player, but actually better known for his accomplishments in Painkiller and Quake 4 and Quake Live. This was Quake 3. He himself was young. He was 17. He had yet to accomplish anything notable at big dual tournaments. Then you had Ni3, in this tournament labelled Radic as his second name, from Canada. Not a top player, just a North American player. You had Logan from Spain, also not a top player. You had Warchild from Chile, a completely unknown player. So being as the top 2 players in the group made it through to the playoffs, expectations were that despite his problems at QuakeCon, 04 would get out of this group handedly in first or second and go through to the double elimination playoff bracket. The only real competition for him should have been Kula. People didn't even know yet how they would match up. Obviously, 04 had much more international experience, had won many championships internationally, including WCG already. Sturmy maybe could have given him a little bit of challenge. Ni, perhaps. Logan, Warchild, no, not really. So in their matchup in the group, 04 and Kula played on Tony 2, and Kula won this game 10-8. Now, despite the scoreline being close, Kula actually played a pretty good tactical game. He ran up the score early and generally was winning this game the whole time. But then what happened was, when Kula arrived at his later game against Ni, Radic, the Canadian, he realised by the way the group had played out, I believe because 04 had not only lost to Kula, but also lost to Logan, the Spaniard, in a shocking upset, that if Kula was to lose this game, he himself would still make the playoffs, but the other player to make the playoffs would be Ni, the Canadian player, and it would not be 04. Now, you can see the obvious incentive here for someone like Kula. He eliminates a potential threat in the tournament, someone who's a top player, someone people expect if he gets to the playoff bracket will be really dangerous. Maybe you'll have to meet him later in the tournament. Sure, you can't meet him coming out of the group because you're both in the same group, but it's a double elimination bracket. If you both go deep, odds are you'll play that run. On the other hand, Ni wasn't a top player. He wasn't a threat to do anything. He didn't actually go on to do anything at this tournament. And so, legend has it, we obviously can't really know, I don't know if Kula's actually ever addressed this topic, that Kula purposely lost the map to ensure 04 didn't make the playoffs. Now, if you look at the game itself, Kula's up pretty decently early on. The game was on DM6, funnily enough, a map that later on would become iconic as Kula's home map. In fact, it was the map that he tooled 04 on the next year at ESWC to win a major and become the dominant player himself. So Kula was up 3 to -1 early in the game, controlling the map. Over the map, it was 15-minute duels back then. He gradually bleeds off a few kills until it's 3-2. And with a 1-kill advantage, late in the game, rather than just run and hide and just run yellow armors and play defensively and force Ni to have to aggressively play into him and therefore possibly give up more kills and have to fight against the clock, Kula takes a bizarre engagement a few seconds before the end of the map, which he would have then won, where he's using a shotgun from the middle platform onto the area where the rocket launcher is up the jump pad where knee's gone up, even though the shotgun is a close range weapon, and then Kula's at the medium to long range, and he ends up getting killed, and the game goes to overtime. In overtime, Kula very aggressively immediately pushes into a position where knee's coming. He only has a rocket launcher himself, I believe. He gets killed immediately, loses the game in overtime, and knee goes through the playoffs, 0-4's out, and Kula's through. Now, DJ Wheat, who was the American shoutcaster at the tournament, the voice of Quake at the time, was obviously, due to being an American, due to being a West Coast guy, which 0-4 was, he was friendly with 0-4. He considered 0-4 a great player. He didn't like the idea that this was perhaps unsportsmanlike, and he got mad about it. He got animated about it, as was his way, you know, he'd go on a rant. He dubbed this, I think, the Cold War, and there was a story that he went up to Kula, who, remember, is only 16 years old, one of the first times he's coming outside of Russia to compete, and he asked Kula, you know, did you lose that game on purpose? Did you do it on purpose to eliminate 0-4? Supposedly, Kula said, like, no good English, I don't speak good English, which, to be fair, Kula had broken English for many, many years beyond that, and famously wasn't super articulate. But DJ Wheat said something along the lines that Kula had a look on his face, a smile that seemed like he was so happy it suggested he had in fact lost the game. He was kind of a bit cheeky, a bit smug that he had eliminated 0-4 and he wouldn't have to play him later in the tournament. Now, the reason why the Cold War became significant in the rest of the tournament is that in the lower bracket of the playoff stage, Kula would play against the other top USA player, Socrates, Jason Silka. And in an epic Tourney 4 game that went into sudden death, Kula lost by a single frag, a single rail shot, and was eliminated from the tournament by Socrates. And so DJ Wheat said that this had ended the Cold War, you know, sort of getting revenge on Kula for 0-4 for Team USA. Now, funnily enough, beyond this, 0-4 would never again regain the #1 spot in the world as a Quake player. In fact, the next player to inherit that throne and legitimately kind of like unify the belts, as it were, would be Kula at the very next major, ESWC 2003. He then went on to be the dominant player in Quake 3 for a couple of years, and since then has gone on to become one of the all-time great players. But this interesting matchup between the two early on, at the beginning of Kula's career, was indicative not only of the rivalry, because oftentimes Kula had the upper hand there, but more importantly, of Kula's kind of mentality, because he was someone who himself was very cool in big pressure stage games, but liked to use trash talking, needling, psychological warfare, mind games, anything he could to put pressure on opponents to beat them not just in the game, but outside of the game as well. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Eddie Wingfors, Daniel Yordanov, Robert Baxter, Travis Greb, Kyla Harris, James Harding, Caesar, and special thanks go out to Matt Shakowski and Jerky's Minion in particular. Want teasers for my upcoming content? How about asking me a question for my monthly AMA? Do you want to take part in a discussion about esports with me? How about suggesting a topic or a guest for my content? Put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today.